Well, this video is about successful interviews, and there's a separate video on job search strategies. So what are we going to be covering in this short video? Interviews, the point of interviews, why do we do them, and what are the rules of the interview game, different types of interviews you may encounter, and we're going to spend a bit of time working out how to answer behaviour-based questions, because these are very common today. And we're going to give you some tips for before, during and after your interview. And the take-home message from this lecture, and you're going to hear this over and over again, is to prepare and practice. If you don't prepare for your interview and you don't practice for your interview, chances are you're not going to be successful. Okay, so the first point, what's the purpose of the interview? Well, from the company's perspective, they want to hire the best candidate, but more importantly, first of all, they want to establish whether the best candidate is in fact appointable. So if all of the candidates are poor, they're not going to just hire the best of a poor lot. They're first of all going to work out whether the candidates are appointable. Can they do the job? Do they have the necessary qualifications and the minimum requirements? And then, given that, they want to hire the best candidate from that group. Now for you, it's important because you want to convince them of your suitability for the job. And the interview is a bit different from the resume and the cover letter, in that the interview is a key point where you're going to be able to get across your motivation for the position. Getting across motivation from a written application is more difficult, but this is the key point when at the interview you're going to show your motivation. And it's also a very important point where you're going to demonstrate your fit within the organisation, and they're going to be making that judgment on you as well. And the last point, people don't often think about this, is the interview is an opportunity for you to go and visit the company, see where you're going to work, meet some of the people, and then decide whether that's somewhere where you would like to work. So if it's not a good fit for you, it may not be a good place to work at all. So what are employers looking for? These are the same things that we talked about with resumes and cover letters. The employer wants to answer three fundamental questions, which are: can you do the job, will you do the job, and will you be a good fit? So nothing new there, and similarly, much of the above can be evidenced by your transferable strengths. So they've looked at your resume already by the time you get to the interview. They've read your cover letter. They've shortlisted you. They may have even talked to you on the telephone. And now they want to look at, some of these finer points. And in fact, the bottom one, will you be a fit, is, as I mentioned, a key one that they're going to try and answer from the interview. And also your motivation, passion, interest, which is, number 2 on their list. Well, let's talk about the types of interviews that you could experience. Traditional one-on-one interviews are pretty common, and these days telephone interviews are also becoming quite common. It actually costs a lot of money for a company to interview you in time, and so they don't want to do that if you're going to be a dud. So they often will telephone interview shortlisted candidates first. And they may ask you a series of questions in the telephone interview, and they're not actually interested in the answers. That seems pretty bizarre, doesn't it? They ask you questions, but they don't want to know the answers. No, in fact, the main purpose of a telephone interview is actually just to see whether you can communicate orally. That's, again, very difficult to determine from a written application, and so employers are turning to telephone interviews in order to determine this. We'll talk more about telephone interviews later. Panel interviews is where you have more than one person interviewing you, and a group interview is where you have more than one person being interviewed at the same time. and we'll go through some of these types of interviews that you may come across: standard questions, hypothetical scenario, left field questions or scenario, and very common these days, behaviour-based questions. We'll go through some of these as we talk further. Traditional interviews, most commonly just you plus one interviewer, and these you'll find these pretty common at your level in terms of first internship. Again, it's very costly to have more than one person interviewing you. That tends to happen for more senior positions. And there's, within that traditional interview, there's two types: structured or unstructured. Structured interviews is where each question is based around one of the key selection criteria. So in other words, they've already worked out the questions before you walk in the room, and they will go through those questions one after the other. They may follow up on your answers a little bit, but they basically already know what they're going to talk to you about. An unstructured interview, on the other hand, is seems more of a casual conversation. They come in, it's very casual. They don't have a list. They're not reading questions from a list and writing things down. They're just basically having a bit of a chat with you. But don't be fooled by this. That this does not mean that it's not a serious interview. It is still very much a serious interview. They want to see what you're like in an informal situation. They are taking very careful mental notes of what you're saying and how you're saying it, and these can often be more difficult than a structured interview. Panel interviews are more common in the public sector, like government jobs, hospitals, universities, government type places, Sydney Water, electricity companies and so on. They tend to be very structured. Each person on the panel will have a particular area of interest. They will have already decided before you walk in the room who's going to ask what question, and each person will focus on a different area. Sometimes they may have someone from the HR department, from the human resources, and so they might ask you specific questions about things like qualifications or work experience, time off required for uni, and so on. So these another form of structured interview. Behavioural interviewing is becoming very common. This is where they ask you about an incident or an experience that you had in the past. And as this quote says, the answers you give about your past experiences will be used to predict your future performance. The theory is if you did it before, you can do it again. And some examples of behaviour or competency-based questions, they'll say something like, tell me about a time when you had to handle an unexpected event. Or another one, what is the most extreme challenge you've faced in your life? Now, for these sorts of questions, preparation is critical. Now, you might say, well, how will I know what sort of question I'm going to get? Well, it turns out that there's really a very finite set of these behaviour-based questions. Okay, if you go to Google and you type behaviour-based questions, you'll come up with zillions of websites that have lists of these questions: top 10, top 20, top 50 competency-based or behaviour-based questions. Do that, have a look at them, get the top 20, and prepare answers for the top 20 before your interview. Practice them, memorise them, go through them in the mirror. Get someone in your family, get a colleague, a friend, to listen to the answers and give you feedback, because this is the only way that you can adequately prepare for this type of interview. So behaviour-based questions are common in becoming very common these days. Again, each question is designed around a competency area that the company will be interested in or very will require from you. And they're asking about a situation where you've demonstrated that skill, behaviour or trait. So the interviewer will probe you for more details based on the question, how you've answered the question. Again, preparation is critical. Now, why do employers like using behavioural questions? Why is this becoming more common? Well, let's have a read of this quote here. It says, someone that's done research in this area, Bock, said it's better to use questions like this because the interesting thing about these sorts of questions is that not only do you get to see how they actually interacted in a real world situation, but you also get other information about, for example, what the candidate thinks is difficult. So if you're asking them about, give me the most extreme example of challenge that you faced in your life so far, and a candidate starts talking about, some trivial situation that they had to solve, well, that's giving insight into, what that candidate considers to be difficult and what sort of life experience they've had in the past. So this is one of the reasons that employers like these type of questions. Now, when you're answering questions like this, it's very important that you answer them in the appropriate way. And here's some examples of what not to do and what to do. So say, for example, they're asking you about project management skills. So they might say, can you tell me about your project management skills? And someone might say, well, I have strong project management skills. Now that's just an ambit claim. Anyone can say that in an interview. And similarly to putting something like this on your resume, saying something like this at an interview is utterly meaningless. It's a waste of breath and time. So don't ever make an ambit claim like that in an interview. You have to back it up with evidence. So if they're asking about project management skills, you can say, during my degree, I've gained knowledge in project management, for example, in the subject, engineering project management. But better still, what they want you to do is to link this evidence to your own specific examples. So, for example, you can say, I've gained foundation knowledge via the project management methodology subject. I was then able to substantially develop my skills in Microsoft Project by applying this knowledge to extracurricular responsibilities, for example, coordinating events. So if they're asking about knowledge, they want to know that you've got the knowledge, where did you get it, and how have you applied it? Knowledge is useless unless you can actually apply it. So that's what they want to know. And even more than that, it's not on this slide, but employers, top tier employers, people like Google, what they want to know is how have you applied it and how does that compare to the norm in your area of work. So, okay, you applied it in coordinating events. How did that go? Was it better than last year? That sort of thing. They want to know what's the outcome of that and how does that compare to what happened before and so on. So preparation is absolutely essential for behaviour questions. What you need to do is think through your most relevant evidence for particular questions. You may have many examples where you can talk about, for example, if they're talking about, demonstrate your leadership skills. You might have oodles of examples of leadership. So pick the most relevant. And it's also important to pick a workplace example because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get a job in a workplace. If you don't have a workplace example, well then perhaps an academic example may be your best one, but a workplace one is better. And where possible, try and pick something that is recent. So it needs to be relevant, recent. It also needs to be a strong case, a strong argument of how you've achieved this, not some wishy-washy, weak, maybe this is applicable or not. So it's got to be relevant, recent, strong, and if possible, show that your behaviour is long-standing. In other words, you might be able to say, well, here's my most recent example, but I've got a bunch of other ones going way back, and therefore that demonstrates that I've been able to do this over a period of time. So you can see that for each one of these key selection criteria that they're looking for, transferable strengths, you need to do a lot of prep to come up with the best answer for each one of these. And in fact, what you should do is prepare 2 example answers for each. And then on the day, in the interview, after you've practiced and rehearsed them, you've got them in your head, you've written them down on cue cards, and you were reading them on the bus on the way to the interview, they're that fresh in your mind, you make the snap decision on the spot as to which one of the 2 examples you're going to use at that time based on the question and the situation. Okay, well, I'm now going to talk about a method which is going to allow you to answer behaviour-based questions with ease. And this is how you're going to prepare your answers. We're going to use what's called the STAR model or STAR technique. It stands for situation, task, action and results. And when you answer a question about a competency, this is what they want you to answer it in, using this method. So, situation, you need to talk about very briefly what is the situation you are faced with. The task, outline the specific problem that you were given. The action, evidence of your personal contribution to the situation. This is where they want details. And the results, summarise the outcomes and the learnings, and if possible, use measurable terms. Okay, they want to know to what extent you achieved the results. So let's have a look at an example. So describe a time when you showed you're an exceptional team player. Okay, so situation. Earlier this semester I volunteered to participate in the Innovative Student Project, an industry research assignment. Task. After a week, some students needed to withdraw. The rest of us were reallocated to a new team, meaning I needed very quickly to identify how best I could contribute to my new group. Action. In teamwork, I naturally gravitate towards being whatever in the team. However, I realised on this occasion it was necessary for someone also to do X. With many critical tasks already assigned, I firstly negotiated take responsibility for blah blah blah. Next I did and so on and so on. I was thus able to play an integral role within my team. The presentation back to the company which we'd researched reflected my key idea too, etc. etc. Finally, I learned in particular ... So you can see there that we're providing quite detailed information about the actions and the results. The situation, the task is really just a very brief overview of what's going on. If they want to know more about the situation of the task, they'll ask in a follow-up question, but action and results is where you should supply more information. Now, you might think, well, that's quite a long answer. Yes, they're only going to ask you 2 or 3 of these in the interview, so you've got to get it right. Now, one of the things that you need to know is how long the interview is going to go for. So if your interview is 20 minutes long and they've already spent 10 minutes asking other questions, well, obviously your answers are going to have to be fairly short, very brief and to the point. If your interview is 45 minutes long and this is the first question they've asked you, then obviously you can elaborate a little bit more. So adjust the length and amount of detail in your answers based on the situation. All right, so that's all I need to say about behaviour-based questions. Let's move on and talk about how to prepare for the interview. A critical thing at the interview is be able to explain why you're interested in working for that organisation. One of the standard questions that you're probably going to be asked is, Why do you want to work for us? You need to have a bloody good answer for that. You need to have practiced, you need to have done the research and figure out why and have as I said, a bloody good answer for that. If you don't, it's probably because A, you're lazy, and no one wants to employ anyone that's lazy, or B, you're applying for too many positions and you don't have the time to do that. Well, my advice in that case would be target fewer organisations but in much greater depth. Find out who it is you do want to work for and then target them. Spend much more time going after that prize job with that organisation. You need to research the industry. What are the industry trends, current issues, mergers, who's who, who's doing what? Okay, where are companies going? What's the trend? You need to be on top of these things. Yes, it's only your first internship. You're not applying for the CEO position, but they want to see some interest. Okay? And obviously you need to research the company. What's their mission? What do they do? What are their products, services? What's the size of the company, the structure? Where are they located? How many states in Australia or places? Who are their clients? Who are their competitors? What are their successes most recently? What's the future direction of the company? You may not get all this information off their website. You may need to put on your Sherlock Holmes hat and do some more deeper digging on the company. Why do you need to do more thorough research for applying? Well, apart from the things I've already talked about, it helps you to make an informed decision about who your target company should be. Not everyone wants to work in every organisation. Organisations have specific cultures and you may not fit into that culture. So it's very important that you do your research and find out, is this the sort of company I want to work for? Does this company have good future career development opportunities? Okay, so you need to find that out. This is not the sort of question you can ask at an interview. If you go in an interview and they ask you, do you have any questions of us? Don't blow that opportunity by asking them, oh, well, can I get a promotion? You need to find that out. You need to know that before you get to the interview. Now, also, another reason you need to do that research is because you need to work out what are their specific requirements. What are they looking for in employees? How else can you prepare a customised application if you do that? And if you don't prepare a customised application, you're likely not going to score an interview because you're not going to stand out from the others. Remember, it's only a very small number of people that make it through to being interviewed. Remember the slides we had from the resume section? We started out with 100 candidates. How many ended up shortlisted and on the interview list? Not many at all. So you've got to be good to get all the way down there, and don't blow it at that last step. You've got to put in the preparation and make sure that you do a good job. Otherwise, you're just going to go back to the start again and have to do it all over again with another company. Now, obviously, when you do research and you know what's going on, it's going to improve your confidence at the interview, and it's going to show that you've got a genuine interest, and that's going to stand out to those interviewers, and you're much more likely to be successful. They're much more likely to overlook some other issues, like maybe having not so great academic results if you're outstanding in other areas. So how do you find out things like this? Well, you do online research, but you can also bowl up to the company and ask some people there, talk to the person on the front desk, and talk to some people that are coming out of the building, maybe at lunchtime, that kind of thing. All right, what about preparing for the actual interview? You need to find out who is going to interview you. Find some information out about them. Go to LinkedIn, see if they've got a LinkedIn profile. Find out if they've got any common interests with you. That can be a starting point for a conversation. Find out when the interview is in detail, how long is it going to take you to get there. Make sure you include a buffer. Trains can sometimes run late. Buses can be late. Taxis can get stuck in traffic. There is absolutely no excuse, short of you having a heart attack and ending up in hospital, there is absolutely no excuse for you to be late to an interview. None whatsoever. You need to find out, as I said before, how long the interview is so that you can tailor the length of your questions. So you need to find out exactly where it is, what are the nearby facilities, if you're going to need to go to the toilet, where is that toilet, if you need a double strength coffee beforehand, where's the nearest coffee shop, and so on. Why are they doing the interview at that time? Where are they in the process? What are your key points to communicate to them? And what exactly are they looking for? What are their priority areas? If you don't know that before you're going into the interview, it's very, very difficult. Now, most interviews, unless they're running hideously late, will give you the opportunity to ask a question. This is a golden opportunity for you to cover one of your strengths that may otherwise have not come out in the interview. So if they are asking you about things and you're itching to tell them about something that's important to you and you think's relevant to them, and that hasn't come through an interview so far, this is your golden opportunity. So you need to ask a question around that demonstrates your itching question. So you need to be a little bit of a politician here and be able to twist the discussion around to something that you want. You've got to do it intelligently. Okay, some bad questions to ask there. How much am I going to get paid? Can I get promoted in this role? Can I move into another section once I've started within the company? These are not showing your interest for the actual job that you are applying for. So don't blow that golden opportunity if you're given it. I think we've already talked about the second point. Ask for details about the entire selection process. Plan what you'll wear, business attire. Google a business attire, and you'll find out what is appropriate to wear to an interview. And know the likely salary range. You shouldn't have to ask what you're going to get paid. The EPP student guide has ranges of salaries in it. These are actual ranges which we gather from the starting forms of students from the previous semester. Now, telephone interviews. We already talked about telephone interviews a little bit already. Some tips for that: tape yourself so that you hear what you sound like. Give some answers to some questions, like behaviour-based questions. And it's also important to practice your listening skills. Very important to listen to the question. If they call you and it's a noisy place, it's no problem to say, look, I'm just on the bus or in the shopping centre. Can I find a quiet place and give me a call back in 5 or 10 minutes? That's perfectly okay. So, but again, you've got to practice for telephone interviews as well. So at the interview itself, make sure you get there 10 minutes early. Do a last minute check on your presentation. Make sure your flyer's zipped up, your buttons on your shirt are done up, and so on. If you have had a double strength coffee, make sure that you haven't spilt the coffee on your shirt. Make a positive first impact. Smile. Maintain eye contact. Shake the person's hand firmly. Now look, I just want to show you a very quick video here of a very famous handshake from someone who was the leader of the opposition, and this handshake actually cost the, well, some people say this handshake cost this fellow an election. The handshake was so bad that it's actually on YouTube. You can Google this, right? Now, what happened was that they're in the middle of election campaign. John Howard on the right here is the current Prime Minister, and he's coming into a television or radio studio to do an interview, and coming out of the door here is the leader of the opposition who's also contesting the election, and obviously there's a film crew there. And let's see what happens. Watch the handshake. Watch John Howard during the handshake.
How are you, Mark? Good, good. How are you? I'm very well. Good to see you. Okay.
Okay, now that was a extremely vigorous handshake.
How are you, Mark? Good, good. How are you? I'm very well. Good to see you. Okay.
That's not the sort of handshake that you should give to your interviewer. I'm going to play it one more time. Watch John Howard. He actually
How are you, Mark? Good, good. How are you? I'm very well. Good to see you. Okay.
So you shake someone's hand like that, you're going to probably not get the job. So handshakes, things like handshakes can be really important. When you go into the interview room, wait to be asked to sit relaxed, upright position, don't slouch. Listen to the entire question before answering. Ask for clarification if necessary. Avoid nervous habits. Keep calm and always behave professionally, right? If you know that you've blown an interview part of the way through, or think you've blown an interview, keep going, maintain professionalism. Remember that when you're there and you're being interviewed as a UTS student, you are actually an ambassador for all UTS students. If you behave like an idiot and walk out of an interview, you're actually putting all UTS students at a disadvantage. So you do need to maintain your professionalism. So during the interview, we've already talked about support your answers with specific examples. Be prepared to talk about your weaknesses. Okay, so you need to prepare answers for that. Again, just go and Google typical interview questions. Make a star of yourself when asked a behavioural question. If they give you an opportunity to ask relevant questions, don't mention salary until they do. Thank them, check any next steps of the selection process and when you're likely to hear from them. If you're in a panel interview, always respond mainly to the person that's actually asking that particular question, but do maintain eye contact with the others in the panel. Telephone interviews, you can have notes in front of you, but obviously don't read from them directly because that will come across. Have a pen and paper available to be able to jot down notes. Structure your answers as per other interviews. Be careful not to interrupt. And it's very difficult to get, you need to get a lot across in your voice. So this is something that you need to practice on, and that's why I suggest you record yourself so that you can hear how you're going to sound. After your interview, you might want to send an email of thanks. If you don't hear back, wait a reasonable time before ringing them. Don't call them the very next morning. If you are offered a position, be prepared to discuss salary and conditions. If you're not offered a position, it's okay to ask for feedback on your interview. That's quite common. So the final tip, and I can't say this strongly enough, you must prepare and you must practice. If you don't do the things that I've talked about in this brief video, you'll have a very, very limited chance of being successful at an interview. And you'll have to go back to start and go through the whole process again with another company. So if you've made it to an interview, you're down to the final couple of percent. Don't blow it. You've got to put in the preparation and practice. Good luck.